I wasn't supposed to hear the sentence that ended everything. I wasn't even in the room. I was crouched under the kitchen sink trying to fix a leak. Water had been dripping all morning. I had the wrench in one hand, my flashlight in the other. And that's when I heard her voice through the vent above me. Soft, low, serious. The kind of tone people use when they think you've already left the house. He's just not the man I thought he'd be. Pause. I'm done, Paige. Like really done. I just haven't told him yet. I froze. I didn't even realize my hand was tightening around the wrench until it slipped and clanged against the pipe loudly. Silence upstairs. Then her footsteps. A few cautious steps, then nothing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there on the tile floor, soaked in rust water, heart sinking. My name is Ira. I'm 39. I work remote tech support from our attic, fix things around the house, and apparently I don't excite my wife anymore. Her name is Fallon. We've been married 9 years. No kids. Just a cat we both pretend to love more than we actually do. We live in Ohio in a modest gray house on a street where every lawn looks like it's trying to win a contest no one agreed to enter. I'd known for a while that Fallon had grown distant. She smiled like she was faking it. She sighed a lot. She scrolled through her phone in bed until the light from the screen bleached her skin cold. But I never imagined she was already emotionally packed up and ready to go. After that morning, I didn't confront her. I didn't ask who Paige was or what else she'd shared. I didn't even bring up the conversation. What was I going to say? Hey babe. I overheard you emotionally disengage from our marriage over speakerphone while I was fixing a pipe. No, I couldn't even handle my own reaction, let alone hers. I just retreated into myself. I started keeping a little green notebook, not a digital one, an actual notebook. I wrote down the things she said to me that felt off. I wrote down the time she came home late from yoga with perfect hair. I wrote down when her location was off on her phone, then suddenly on again. I wrote it all, not for revenge, not to build a case, just to remind myself I wasn't losing my mind. She began saying things that sliced me up in subtle ways. Ira, you're too stable. There's no fire, no spontaneity. Or, I thought marriage would feel more like a journey. This just feels like standing still. I wanted to scream. Of course, we're standing still, Fallon. That's what happens when one person's walking away while the other's just trying to hold the damn door open. But I never said that. I nodded. I smiled. I offered to cook dinner more often. I downloaded a meditation app she liked. I even tried waking up earlier to walk with her before her job. She declined every time. She had already left me. She just hadn't moved her suitcase. Then came the Wednesday night. She walked into the living room while I was folding a sweatshirt and said flatly, Ira, I think I'm done. No build-up, no drama, no anger. Just that. Like she was saying she was done with the dishes or the laundry. I don't know what she expected. Tears, a speech, a fight. I had all of those things in me boiling, but I gave her none of it. I looked at her. I held her gaze. Then I nodded once. Okay, I said. She tilted her head, confused. That's it. I didn't answer. I walked into the bedroom, picked up the small duffel bag I'd quietly packed 2 days earlier, took my green notebook, and left the house without slamming the door. Fallon didn't follow me. She didn't call out. Maybe she thought I was bluffing, but I wasn't because she never saw it coming. I checked into the Sandstone Motel just off Route 42, the kind of place with scratchy sheets, buzzing lights, and a complimentary breakfast no one actually touches. I didn't care. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for quiet, for space, for the sound of something other than Fallon sighing when I walked into her room. The woman at the front desk didn't ask questions, just slid me the key card, handed me a vending machine voucher, and looked back down at her crossword puzzle. I appreciated that. The world felt loud, and her silence was a small gift. The first night alone didn't feel like freedom, felt like grief. I laid there in that stiff bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering our first apartment, our camping trip in Minnesota, the time she kissed me with a sparkler in her hand and nearly set my flannel on fire. I remembered how she used to hum to herself when she brushed her hair, and how that humming had stopped years ago, and I never asked why. I wondered if she was sitting in our house thinking about any of that, but I doubted it. By morning, the motel coffee was sludge and my phone had 11 missed calls. None from Fallon, my mom, 2 from my coworker, Levi, and the rest from numbers I didn't recognize. No texts from her either. No, "Where are you?" No, "Let's talk." Just digital silence. I didn't go to work that day. I called in and said there was a family emergency. It wasn't a lie. My marriage had flatlined. That counts, right? Instead, I drove to the little bookstore where Fallon and I used to go on Saturdays before everything got complicated. It was still there, still smelled like dust and cheap coffee. I sat in the same corner we used to sit in, holding a book I wasn't reading, watching couples walk in and out, holding hands, laughing. I felt like I was watching a world I used to belong to. Now I was just some guy staring through the glass. That night, I opened my green notebook again. I didn't just write down what she'd said or done. I wrote about me this time, about all the moments I'd stayed quiet when I should have spoken up, about the day she canceled our anniversary dinner last minute and I told her it was okay, even though I'd spent 3 hours cooking, about the time she laughed too hard at a work friend's text and I pretended not to notice. I started wondering when exactly I became invisible in my own marriage, not just to her, but to myself. The next day, I drove back to our neighborhood. I didn't go inside. I parked 2 streets over and just watched from a distance. Her car was there, same spot, curtains drawn, porch light off, even though it was already dark. She wasn't out having some dramatic affair that night. She was just home in the same place I used to live, breathing air I used to breathe. I don't know what I expected. Maybe to see her pacing the living room, waiting for me to walk through the door. Maybe to see her scrolling through her phone, looking miserable. But nothing happened. It was just a quiet house with my ghost still in it. Then something strange happened. A car pulled into our driveway around 10:47 p.m. Not a rideshare. A dark gray sedan. Headlights stayed on too long. I watched a tall man in a suit get out. He didn't knock. He just used the keypad, the one Fallon and I installed last year. I watched the door open, and I watched her let him in without hesitation. I don't know how long I sat there after that. Minutes, hours. My hands went cold. My stomach twisted. And yet I wasn't surprised. The woman who told her friend she was done hadn't said it on a whim. She meant it, and she had backup waiting. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly guess, was that I had already started unraveling everything behind the scenes. The lease? It was in my name. The savings account? Frozen. The attorney I've been working with? He was very interested in the little green notebook. Fallon thought I'd disappear quietly, but I was done being silent. The next morning, I woke up with one thought repeating in my head like a skipping record. She opened the door for him, not cautiously, not like a woman hiding a mistake, but like someone greeting a man who'd been there many times before. And that's what tore at me most. Not the betrayal itself, but how normal it seemed for her. I checked out of the Sandstone that afternoon and drove to the co-working office I'd rented the week before. Fallon never knew about it. She always assumed I worked from home, but I'd started going there a few days a week once I noticed how little she cared where I was. I used the time not just to work, but to think, to prepare. Inside the office, I spread out everything on the table. Printed copies of financial records, screenshots from shared accounts, photos of charges I hadn't made, a copy of our marriage certificate, even the prenup she forgot existed, the one we signed during what she called her realist phase back when we were still engaged. Ira the pushover, Ira the quiet one, Ira who doesn't yell or make scenes. That's who she thought she married, and that's exactly who I let her believe I still was. But behind my silence, I'd been building a wall, one brick at a time, and now she was about to run straight into it. That evening, I texted Fallon for the first time since walking out. "We need to talk. You can pick the place, but it needs to be public." She replied 15 minutes later. "How about Lewis's Cafe? Tomorrow? 6 p.m. Lewis's, our old breakfast spot. Clever choice. Public enough for civility. Familiar enough to feel like a trap." She wanted control, to ease into the conversation with coffee and pancakes like it wasn't our lives unraveling. When I walked in the next evening, she was already there, her nails done, wearing the necklace I bought her for our 7th anniversary. She looked at me like I was late for something I didn't know I'd been invited to. "Ira," she said, like it was just any day. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded and sat across from her, ignoring the fake smile she wore like perfume. "So," she began, stirring her tea, "I didn't expect you to leave like that." "You said you were done," I replied calmly. "Well, yeah, but I thought you'd want to talk through things. Work out logistics." "Like you worked out things with the man in the gray sedan?" I asked. Her spoon froze mid-stir. Her face didn't drop. Not right away. Fallon was too composed for that. Instead, her smile faltered just slightly at the corners. "You've been spying on me. I've been observing. There's a difference." She leaned back and crossed her arms. "Okay, Ira, you want to do this the ugly way?" "No," I said. "I've already done it the smart way." I pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table. "What's this?" "Your exit plan. Signed by both attorneys. No alimony. I keep the house. You keep your car and whatever's in the personal account you opened under your maiden name 2 months ago." Her eyes widened. "You went through my things. You left it open on your laptop." "I didn't snoop. You just stopped caring whether I saw." She said nothing. "You were done, Fallon," I continued. "You said it yourself. So, I just made sure we didn't waste any more time pretending." "I didn't mean it like this," she whispered. "I wasn't ready." "But you were ready for him." That hit her. She looked down, biting the inside of her cheek. For a split second, I saw regret in her eyes. Not sorrow, just regret that she hadn't controlled the narrative. "You think you're the victim here?" she said, suddenly sharpening. "You were always so passive, like a ghost walking through your own life." I nodded. "You're right. I was passive. But ghosts watch everything. And now I'm haunting the version of you I thought you could leave behind." She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair slightly off balance. "I'll have my lawyer call yours," she snapped, grabbing the envelope. "Already has," I said without looking up. 3 days ago." She walked out, her heels clicking sharply across the tile, her spine straight, but her hands trembling just enough for me to notice. As I watched her disappear into the parking lot, something inside me finally clicked into place. Not triumph, not vengeance, just clarity. She thought I'd vanish quietly, like all the other things she'd grown tired of. But I left with my head held high, and she never saw it coming. I thought that after our meeting at Lewis's, things would quiet down, that Fallon would retreat, lick her wounds, and let the dust settle. But that's not what happened. Not with someone like her. The next morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, another one. Then a text. "This is Calvin, Fallon's brother. Call me. She's not doing well." I stared at the message for a while. Calvin and I had never been close. He was one of those guys who made everything into a joke, the kind of man who'd clap you on the back too hard and ask invasive questions with a grin. But the wording, "she's not doing well," that got under my skin. Fallon might have shattered us, but I didn't want her unraveling. I called. He answered immediately. "Ira. Hey man. I know this is weird, but she's spiraling." "Define spiraling," I said, trying not to sound cynical. "She showed up at our mom's house crying, then locked herself in the bathroom for 2 hours. She's saying you blindsided her. That she didn't know you. We're going to leave her," I finished. He went quiet. Then, carefully, "She said you planned this for months. That you made her look like the villain." "I didn't have to," I said, voice low. "She handled that part herself." Another silence. Then he sighed. "Look, man, I don't know what went down between you two, but I do know she didn't think you had it in you. Whatever you did, it rattled her." That part made me pause. I hadn't expected Fallon to care, to react. I thought she'd use that gray-suited guy as a parachute and land somewhere new without looking back. But apparently, I'd shaken her in a way I never could when we were married. Later that day, Fallon called me herself. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Ira, I just want to understand. When did you change?" When did you start planning all this? Who are you right now? There it was. Not guilt, not apology, not ownership. Just confusion that I had become something she didn't anticipate. That I'd stopped being predictable. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. Not a revenge plot, not a dramatic life transformation, just the basics. I moved into a small second-floor apartment above a hardware store. The landlord was a guy named Milt, a widower who mostly kept to himself but offered me free use of his basement tools if I helped him move things on weekends. I said yes. I needed to keep my hands busy. In the evenings, I walked to the diner down the street and read from my green notebook. Then I started writing something new in the back pages. Not notes about Fallon, but about me. About the version of myself I'd hidden for years. I wrote about how I always waited for permission to speak. About how I mistook being quiet for being kind. How I'd apologized for things I never did just to avoid tension. Fallon hadn't destroyed me. She just exposed how unfinished I really was. One night, as I was locking up the apartment, I saw a familiar car parked across the street. Fallon's. I didn't move. I just stood in the doorway watching her sit there in the dark. She didn't get out. Didn't knock. She just sat staring at the building like it had stolen something from her. After maybe 10 minutes, she drove away. It happened again 2 nights later and again the next week. Fallon wasn't stalking me, at least not in the dangerous sense. She was orbiting, hovering on the edge of what used to be hers, trying to understand how I'd left without collapsing. I think it scared her more than any screaming match ever could. A few days after that, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo, one of the few I knew she kept in her jewelry box. It was of us at Lake Crescent 6 years ago. I was holding a fish too small to brag about. She was laughing, hair soaked from the rain. On the back, in her handwriting, "This was real for a while. I'm sorry I let it rot." No signature, just that. I stared at it for a long time, heart stuck somewhere between rage and sorrow. Then I folded it up, slid it between the pages of the green notebook, and put both in a drawer. Fallon wanted to rewrite the ending, but I wasn't letting her hold the pen anymore. A week after the package arrived, I finally stopped watching the door. For a while, every time a car slowed down near my building, I half expected it to be her again. Fallon. Another late-night visit. Another silent stakeout. Another reminder of how our marriage ended not with fire, but with frost. But the car didn't come back. The text stopped. Her brother stopped calling. It was like the storm had passed. Not with destruction, but with abandonment. At first, I told myself it was peace. But deep down, I knew better. Fallon was recalculating. I kept moving forward. I started going to group runs on Saturdays. Even though I hated running, I started helping Milt more with the hardware shop downstairs, stocking shelves and lifting pallets. The rhythm of it, the effort, the physicality, it grounded me. I wasn't just recovering. I was re-entering the world. Then something happened that cracked the surface again. One morning, while checking my email, I saw a message from Fallon's work address. The subject line read simply, "Misunderstanding." I hovered over the trash icon, but curiosity won. I opened it. "Ira, I never told you the whole story. The man you saw, he's not what you think. His name is Chandler. He was my therapist. I've been seeing him for months after my father passed, and I didn't want you to know. I thought you'd see it as weakness. That's why he had the door code. I let him in so he could check on me after I skipped sessions. There was never anything romantic. I swear to you, I read it 3 times, then a 4th. Then I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes, feeling something that should have been relief but felt more like betrayal wearing a disguise. If it were true, if this Chandler was just a therapist, then why didn't she ever mention grief? Why did she say she was done, like I was some worn-out couch she couldn't return? Why talk about me to her friend page like I was already a ghost? Why never invite me into that pain? And then it hit me. Even if she hadn't cheated in the traditional sense, she still removed me from her emotional life long before I ever walked out that door. She let another man have access to the most private parts of her. Not her body, maybe, but her soul. That kind of intimacy leaves a scar just as deep. Still, I did something I didn't expect. I replied, "Then you should have said something when I was still there. I wasn't afraid of your pain, Fallon. I was afraid of how much you kept from me. I'm glad you got help, but I had no idea you even needed it. That's the part that broke me." She never responded. Not a word, not a dot, nothing. And for some reason, that silence felt more final than the day she said she was done. Weeks passed. Fall came. The leaves along Route 42 burned gold and crimson, and I started to feel lighter. My green notebook, once a log of quiet pain, became a place for sketches and lists, new goals, new recipes I wanted to try, even names of cities I might like to visit. Then one evening, as I was closing the hardware shop, Milt nodded toward the counter and said, "You've got a visitor." I turned, expecting a neighbor, maybe a customer from earlier in the week. But it wasn't. It was Paige. Yes, that Paige. Fallon's friend. The one from the phone call. She looked uncomfortable, like someone showing up to the wrong wedding. She was holding a small brown envelope and a very large cup of coffee. "Ira," she said, "can we talk?" Everything in me screamed, "No." But I gestured toward the bench outside anyway. She sat. I sat. The night buzzed with crickets and far-off traffic. "I didn't come to cause trouble," she started. "But Fallon doesn't know I'm here. She'd lose her mind if she did." "Good to know," I said flatly. She offered me the envelope. "I think you should have this. Fallon wrote it for you a week after you left. She never sent it. I found it by accident." I didn't take it at first, just stared at it in her hand. "Why are you giving this to me now?" Paige hesitated. "Because you deserved more than a shutdown in silence. And because, honestly, I don't think she even knows what she wants anymore. But I saw how she treated you, and I wasn't okay with it." I finally took the envelope and tucked it into my coat. I didn't open it then. I just thanked her quietly and watched her walk away into the dark. That night, I stared at that envelope for hours, not reading it, just holding it, wondering if closure could really come from words that had sat hidden in a drawer like a secret apology. Eventually, I slid it open, and what I read inside changed everything I thought I knew about why she let go and what it actually meant when someone says, "I'm done." The envelope contained 6 pages, lined, handwritten, some words crossed out, others underlined twice. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I started reading. Fallon's handwriting looked shakier than usual. Messier. Not the clean, curated notes she used to leave on the fridge or the clipped to-do lists I found in her planner. This was something raw, something closer to what I wish she had said in person. She started with, "Ira, if you're reading this, it means Paige betrayed me. But maybe that's not such a bad thing." I kept going. She wrote about how she'd started slipping into a fog the year before. It wasn't me, she said, but also somehow always a little bit me. She talked about feeling stuck, like the life she built had started fitting her wrong. "Like wearing a sweater I loved once," she wrote, "but now it itches and tightens around the neck." She admitted to detaching, to testing me. She said she wanted me to notice something was wrong, to force a confrontation because she didn't have the courage to start one herself. And when I didn't, she took that as proof I didn't care, when really I was just waiting for her to let me in. She wrote about Chandler, the therapist, and how she convinced herself he was a safe space because he didn't know her history, her habits, the version of herself she thought had become boring. "He saw me as a woman in pain," she wrote, "not as a wife who'd stopped putting in effort. With you, I felt seen in ways I didn't like. With him, I felt invisible in a way that felt peaceful." She said she never slept with him, that she thought about it, but the guilt made her stop before anything happened. "But I know emotional betrayal counts too," she added, "and I won't ask you to forgive that. I just hope someday you'll understand how afraid I was to ask for help." It was the final paragraph that cut the deepest. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. "You were always steadier than me, kinder than I gave you credit for. I thought you'd crumble when I said I was done. But you didn't. You left like a man who'd been broken already. I didn't know you had that kind of strength. I think that's the part that scared me the most, that I never really knew what you were made of until it was too late." I closed the letter and sat in the silence of my apartment, the only noise coming from the occasional creak of the floorboards above me. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt hollow. It was strange. I had wanted answers for so long. Wanted to know why she turned cold. Why she pushed me out. Why she opened the door for someone else while I was still trying to get back inside emotionally. Now I had those answers. And they didn't fix anything. Because understanding isn't the same as healing. The next day, I took the letter to a nearby lake where Fallon and I once spent an anniversary. The dock was empty. The wind was sharp. I sat on a bench and reread every word. And then, for reasons I can't fully explain, I burned it. I didn't do it out of anger. I wasn't trying to erase her words. But I needed a line in the sand. A moment where I stopped letting her version of the story sit alongside mine. I watched the paper curl and darken, flame swallowing ink, until nothing remained but ash. And in that moment, something shifted in me. Not closure, not peace, but motion. That evening, I got a message from someone unexpected. Levi, my coworker from the tech company. He'd heard through the grapevine that I'd moved out and asked if I wanted to grab drinks. I almost declined, but something told me to go. At the bar, Levi leaned in after his second beer and said, "Man, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I always thought Fallon was kind of intimidating." I laughed, caught off guard. Why? She had this way of looking at people like she was trying to decide whether they were worth her time. You never did that. You just listened. That sat with me. The truth is, I did listen. I always listened. But for too long, I stopped listening to myself. Later that night, walking home, I passed by a couple sitting on a bench. They were mid-argument, voices low but tense. The woman said, "Just say something. Anything." And the man, arms folded, muttered, "I don't know what you want me to say. That was us once." Me frozen. Fallon, desperate. And both of us missing the bridge we were supposed to build together. Only now I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't stuck in the silence. I wasn't trying to hold together something that only one of us was willing to repair. Fallon thought saying she was done would make her free. But what neither of us saw coming was that I'd be the one who actually walked away. A month passed, then another. The seasons shifted quietly, like they do when you're not really watching. One morning, I noticed frost on the windshield of my car, and it hit me. I'd been out of the house for over 3 months. Long enough for my body to adjust to the quiet. Long enough for my soul to stop waiting for her to call again. Fallon didn't reach out anymore. There were no more sightings of her parked near my apartment. No late-night texts. No accidental run-ins at grocery stores or coffee shops we used to visit. She had disappeared as efficiently as I had. And honestly, that's when it started to feel real. Not just a break. Not just a messy chapter. But the end of a story we had both outgrown. But the strangest part of grief isn't the heartbreak. It's the identity crisis that follows. For so long, I had been a husband. That role had defined my routines, my thoughts, even my personality. I'd made compromises not just for love, but for comfort. I stopped going on hikes because Fallon hated bugs. I let go of old friends she found draining. I even changed how I laughed. I realized this one night, because she once said my laugh made me sound too eager. When you let someone shape you for too long, you forget the contours of your own original form. So I started to rebuild. Not as an act of revenge or reinvention, but as an act of recovery. I went back to things that used to bring me joy, things I hadn't touched in years. I found my old sketch pad, the one from college, shoved in a box of cords and tools. I bought new pencils. I started drawing in the early mornings before the sun came up while the city still felt half asleep. I called up a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, Danica, a woman I used to work with back when Fallon and I were just dating. We'd always clicked, but Fallon hadn't liked the way Danica smiled too much when she talked to me. So I stopped replying to texts. I stopped inviting her to things. I erased the friendship to preserve the peace at home. And now I was sitting across from her at a diner trying to explain all the years that had passed in a single breath. To her credit, she didn't judge me. She just smiled and said, "Sounds like you were trying to disappear politely." That line stuck with me for days. Because she was right. For years, I wasn't just quiet. I was vanishing. shrinking myself to fit a shape Fallon wouldn't criticize, toning myself down to avoid conflict. I thought I was being a good husband. Turns out I was just being a fading one. Around that time, I had a dream. In it, I was back in our old house. Fallon was upstairs laughing with someone I couldn't see, and I was trying to pack a suitcase with hands that wouldn't work right. Everything kept falling out. Socks, shirts, memories. And when I finally zipped it shut, I turned around to leave, but the door had vanished. Just wall. Just more beige drywall. I woke up in a sweat, sitting up in bed, heart racing. That dream haunted me for days. Not because it was scary, but because it felt like a metaphor I couldn't ignore. Even after walking away, I was still carrying the residue of a life that didn't fit. Still trying to close a suitcase full of things I should have thrown out years ago. I knew what I had to do next. I called the lawyer and asked him to begin formal proceedings for the final property settlement. The house was still in my name, and while I could have forced a sale or taken it back, I told him to give Fallon the option to buy me out if she wanted it. If that house meant anything to her beyond convenience, she could keep it. But I wasn't stepping foot in it again. Then, for the first time, I started looking at new cities. Not vacations, moves. I pulled out a map, circled 3 towns I'd always been curious about, and scheduled road trips for the next month. I didn't know where I was going to land. I just knew I couldn't stay anchored in a place that was haunted by almosts and could-have-beens. Before I left, I did one more thing. I wrote Fallon a letter. Not out of sentimentality, not for closure, just as a final chapter. It was short, honest, kind. Fallon, we were real. I know that. And maybe you do too. But we stopped seeing each other long before we said goodbye. I wish you peace. I really do. And I hope someday we both become people we would have actually loved. Ira. I didn't mail it. I folded it, slid it into the back of the green notebook, and packed it in my duffel. The next morning, I loaded the car, turned the key, and drove away from the city that held our story. I didn't cry. I didn't look back, because for the first time in years, I wasn't walking away from something broken. I was walking towards something whole. The first town I visited was called Millmuir, a quiet place tucked between 2 rivers and surrounded by hills that blazed gold and crimson in autumn. It didn't have much. A used bookstore, a couple of diners, a main street with crooked sidewalks and hand-painted signs. But it had air, stillness, space to breathe. I rented a small cabin on the edge of town for 2 weeks. No TV, spotty internet, just trees, wind, and my own thoughts. In that stillness, something inside me finally settled. I stopped checking my phone for missed calls that never came. I stopped replaying old arguments in my head like broken records. I woke up with the sun, drank coffee without the weight of unfinished conversations, and started sketching again, not from memory, but from life. Trees, faces, little moments I used to ignore. One afternoon, I sat at a cafe sketching the view from the window when the waitress, her name was Lainey, paused beside me and said, "You know, most people just scroll their phones while they wait." I smiled. "Most people don't know what they're missing." She tilted her head. "I like that. You passing through." "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not." Over the next few days, we talked more. Nothing dramatic, just real conversations. She asked thoughtful questions. Listened. Didn't press. It wasn't romantic, and that's what made it feel safe. Like 2 people just existing without expectation. On my last morning in Millmuir, she handed me a note along with my coffee. "If you ever decide to stop passing through, come back and stay a while." I folded it, smiled, and told her, "Maybe I will." From there, I drove west, visited 2 more towns. Each one had its own rhythm, its own voice, but none felt quite like Millmuir. By the time I returned to my apartment weeks later, the lease felt too big, too quiet. I packed my things and made the move official. Milt shook my hand and told me I looked 10 years younger. I hadn't noticed it, but maybe I was starting to believe it, too. Back in Millmuir, I found a small rental near the edge of town and picked up part-time work at the bookstore. I sketched in the mornings, stacked shelves in the afternoons, and wrote in my notebook at night. Not the old green one, but a new one, clean and untouched, with a soft leather cover and thick, welcoming pages. One evening, walking through the trees just before sunset, I stopped and realized something strange. I was happy. Not fireworks happy, not movie ending happy, but quiet, steady, genuine peace. The kind that hums through your bones and makes you grateful for every small thing. A warm drink, a shared smile, a room that feels like yours. Fallon never did reach out again. I never looked her up. Some endings are better left closed. But in a way, I owe her, because her "I'm done" became the start of my beginning. She thought I would shatter, but I rebuilt. Slowly, quietly, brick by brick, version by version. And now, every time I hear the phrase "starting over," I don't think of it as failure. I think of it as freedom, because I didn't just walk away from her. I walked back to myself. And that, finally, is everything.